right. Hello, everybody. Welcome back to the Here in Schenectady podcast. I am your new host from the Schenectady County Historical Society. My name is Madeline. I'm the brand new program assistant at the Historical Society. And joining me today is...
Hi, guys. I'm still here. It's Mike Diana, the Director of Education at the Schenectady County Historical Society. So we're really excited to have Madeline here with us as part of our full-time crew. And we wanted to get her involved with our podcast as well. So, Madeline, have you ever done a podcast like this before?
No, this is my very first time. You know, I'm a fan of podcasts, but first time hosting. I'm really excited.
Well, first time for everything, right?
Yes, exactly. I've already had a lot of new experiences in my month here. So this is great.
Well, Madeline, what are we talking about today?
Well, today we are going to be talking about the Erie Canal.
Oh, boy, the Erie Canal.
Yes.
It's been 30 minutes since I last talked about the Erie Canal. I have to hurry up.
Yeah, no, that's something I've kind of learned about a lot. So fun fact for the audience, I'm from Florida originally. And when you grow up, you know, so far away from New York, Erie Canal doesn't really come up that often.
That's
I know.
sacrilege. Ron DeSantis. We got stuff to talk about.
Yeah, I gotta beef up our education system.
Do you guys have any canals in Florida?
We do actually have a lot of canals.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, it's a whole separate history though. It's more about drainage than it is anything else.
Not about transportation. It's about
not as much.
moving water.
Yeah, but that could be a bonus episode for our podcast. It's a whole different story.
Follow up.
So I'm relatively new to New York. I've only lived here for a couple years. But any kind of native New Yorker that I've met over the last 2 years always seem to know a lot about the Erie Canal. There's like some song that everybody learned in elementary school that someone sang
15 miles on the Erie Canal, and you guys never sang that?
No.
Oh my God. I mean, I'm not going to sing it right now.
Yeah, maybe copyright too. I don't know.
I don't know if it's public domain or not.
Yeah, exactly. So I've learned a little bit about the Erie Canal over the years, and I've learned even a little bit more in the last month that I've worked here. So I'd be happy to share what I've learned so far as kind of an introduction to the audience in case they don't know.
Well, yeah, I mean, you can always learn more about the Erie Canal, folks. I know any upstate New Yorkers in the audience, you know, there's always more to learn about the Erie Canal, more than we could possibly tell you in the amount of time that we have here today. So Maddie, why don't you get us started? You know, what is the Erie Canal? Why does it come to be? How does this all get started?
Yeah. Well, the reason why we're even talking about the Erie Canal is because this is actually a pretty kind of important year, 2025, because it is the 200th anniversary of the completion of the Erie Canal. It was finished in 1825. Kind of a big deal back in the day. A bit of a feat of engineering.
Yeah,
right?
People said it couldn't be done. When Thomas Jefferson, maybe a generation prior, when he was, someone talked about the idea with him, and he thought it was completely impossible. And he was apparently a pretty smart dude, but he didn't think it was possible.
Yeah, and people had tried before, right?
That's true. You know, they had tried kind of on a smaller scale to canalize some of the natural waterways throughout New York State, like the Mohawk River. They tried to canalize that at the turn of the 19th century, and that was not successful. It took a whole new kind of effort and a vastly greater amount of resources than anyone had ever contributed to anything on the North American continent before. It really was ahead of its time, perhaps.
Yeah, perhaps, right? And it even, it took 8 years to complete. So obviously, maybe with more modern engineering tools, it wouldn't have taken quite that long.
Well, yeah, it was really just guys with shovels, more or less. I mean, that was the meat and potatoes of digging this ditch. Of course, you got to clear the trees and pull up the stumps, and they devised all these interesting and new kind of techniques for doing that. But at the end of the day, it's just, people with shovels digging a hole across, the state of New York.
Or a ditch.
A ditch, yeah.
People. Clinton's ditch.
Oh, yep, that's DeWitt Clinton, of course, the governor who really pushed all this through, the champion of the Erie Canal. It's hero, perhaps you might say.
Yeah. And but once they finished the canal, it was kind of really important for about a century of both New York history and also American history and even global history.
Oh, for sure.
Really, because it kind of completely changed the way shipping worked in America. Kind of changed the economies and trade systems of, again, all sorts of different areas of the country. Because prior to the canal, pretty much the only way to kind of travel between the East Coast of the United States to kind of like the Midwest or the Great Lakes region was over land, right? And that was really hard because there are kind of these mountains in the way.
There's a lot of
lot of
mountains. If it was just one, we could probably walk around it, but there's like several.
Exactly, yeah. So it made transportation really difficult, kind of almost separated like all these different areas of the country. But one of the kind of very few navigable kind of corridors through those mountains was the Mohawk River, right? Hence why some of the kind of earliest attempts at a canal were, just focused on the Mohawk River specifically and changing what was already there instead of building something new.
And in fact, it's interesting you mentioned that because that's one of the reasons why people in Schenectady were not actually excited about the canal.
Really? Okay.
When they heard about it, when, DeWitt Clinton was publicizing his plans, people in Schenectady were not just skeptical, but kind of hostile to the idea because, before the canal, Schenectady is the gateway to the West, right? It is the first port of navigation along the Mohawk River. So it has the strategic location that it can control, the flow of traffic and trade to the west and then whatever's coming from the west back east. But if the Erie Canal were to be completed, then Schenectady is just another stop along the way, right? The canal begins just north of Albany and it ends, over by Buffalo, and Schenectady is just another stop along the way. So people were not actually excited. Not here in Schenectady. Maybe other people, other places were excited for the prospect of the canal, but in Schenectady, it met a frosty reception.
Yeah, kind of losing that special status that they coveted for so long.
And we've never been special ever since. No, that's not true. We've always been special, folks, here in Schenectady.
Definitely. But the canal itself, like in its entirety, was really special, right? Because, like you said, like new towns, maybe not Schenectady, but other towns are able to kind of grow up along the canal.
Oh, yeah.
And kind of become these hubs for transportation and kind of being able to ship things up and down the canal or providing a port for, weary sailors to kind of rest for the evening or get provisions, anything like that.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. And I mean, you can just look at a map of upstate New York. I mean, like the canal, you could say, created upstate New York. All of the major towns or cities in upstate New York, like central and western upstate New York, are right along the canal. Think of Utica, think of Rome, think of Syracuse, Rochester, all the way out to Buffalo, right? I mean, it just follows all right in a line right along the Erie Canal. So it's hard to overstate the importance of the Erie Canal, which is why we talk about it. And I'm sure every city, along its way has its own canal history and a canal heritage and canal stories and anecdotes. Which are almost as interesting as the ones here in Schenectady, but, it's just the way that it is.
Yes. Well, it wasn't just those cities along the canal, like, directly that benefited, right? So, like, for example, New York City became kind of this global hub for, trade because what the Erie Canal essentially did was connect the Great Lakes region all the way through upstate New York to the Hudson River. And then you could go down the Hudson River to New York City. And then from there, you have a port on the Atlantic Ocean. You can pretty much go anywhere in the world, right? And so...
Oh, yeah, that's a great point. A great point.
Kind of forged that final connection between a very prominent agricultural area of the Great Lakes to, again, the rest of the world, the shipping world through New York City.
I mean, that's a good point. When you kind of I don't have the numbers here with me, but when you kind of chart the growth of New York City compared to its contemporaries, right? Compared to Philadelphia, compared to Boston, compared to, Charleston, right? And over the early 19th century, the population and the growth of New York City is just exponential, whereas they grow at a much more modest pace. And I think a main contributor to that growth is that New York City was connected to the interior where the other cities along the coast simply were not and could not be. It just wasn't possible. So New York City, basically, you owe it all to us. Sorry, guys, I know you think you're so cool out there, but it's really all an upstate New York thing when you think about it.
Exactly. They need to respect that history.
Yeah. There you go.
So what were some of... We talked about how, the canal, like you said, connected the interior to the rest of the world, right? What were some of the things that were being shipped back and forth along the canal from the Great Regions outwards or into that area.
Yeah, one of the most important things would be agricultural goods, right? Because you think about all these newly developing, areas and states, really, the kind of the Midwest, and there's a lot of very productive farmland out there, but if they could grow all these crops, they would very much outgrow their own local consumption. And let's say in like Ohio, and to get those products to market, they would have to get to the East Coast, and that's what the Erie Canal does. And they could have gone down the Mississippi River, right? That was the other possible way, down to New Orleans. But the canal just kind of made that journey so much faster and easier that the canal actually kind of really interrupted the growth of New Orleans, just as a little side note. So agricultural products were a big thing, but any kind of bulk, raw material from these very rich areas, these developing areas, would be shipped along the canal, kind of coal and steel and just any industrial input for these rapidly growing cities along the coast like New York City. They need all these raw materials, and that could be shipped along the canal as well.
So basically, New York City should be thanking us, but we should we should be apologizing to New Orleans, though.
They know.
Yeah, true, very true. So yeah, and so outside of kind of that, like, ascendancy of like the economics and the trade and all of that, one of the things that I've kind of found most interesting about the canal is the engineering behind it, right? Is kind of, we talk about it being a ditch and how they had to, go in with just shovels and pickaxes to kind of build it in the first place. But there was kind of a lot of kind of interesting steps in terms of like building locks, right?
Yeah, the locks are the big innovation, I would say, because between the eastern and western ends of the canal, there's 500 feet, a little bit more than 500 feet of elevation that you have to gain. And boats don't like to go up in elevation, right? They want level terrain. So, prior to the canal, like if you were traveling along the Mohawk River, you would inevitably hit like a waterfall, right? Like let's say it's only 5 feet tall as a waterfall. That's not a huge waterfall, but your boat's not going to go up that. It will go down that too, but you don't want to do that. So what the locks do is they can transport you up and down the 5, the 10 feet. They were usually 10-foot locks originally. Using essentially like a water elevator system, right? You pull into a chamber which can be closed. They fill the chamber up with water, or they let water out of the chamber, depending on whether you want to go up or down. And that raises or lowers you to the level that you want to be on the other side. And that was a huge improvement. What would have before been a day of portaging around a natural obstacle, that is to say, taking your boat and all of your stuff out of the water, moving it up or downstream around the obstacle, putting everything back into the water. What would be a day's worth of an interruption is really just if there's no line for the lock, it's really just a matter of 15, 20 minutes going through the lock.
Yeah. And then in order to kind of get all of that water that you needed in order to operate the locks, or even just operate the canal in general, there's kind of this system of feeder canals that were built in order to bring water to the Erie Canal, because this was not a naturally occurring waterway, right?
Yeah, and it's brilliant to see, like, imagine this whole system being just fed by gravity, just water being just pulled by gravity down into these canals, and very ingenious ways of moving water into or out of the canal, right? Because if you get a lot of rain and there's too much water flowing into the canal, you have to get a way to get that water out. So just using just kind of the natural movement of the water, and I guess redirecting the natural movements of the water, they made this system work. And I just think it's so incredible that they could do that all those years ago, 200 years ago now.
Yeah.
It's wild.
No, like you said, it was ahead of its time in so many ways, and it's almost a miracle that it was able to, be put together. So yeah, I think that was a pretty good intro to the whole. I feel like I should get a grade after I did like a book
I think you did lovely. I think that was a great introduction, especially for someone from Florida. I think you gotta.
Yeah.
but I'm gonna kind of talk about how the canal would transform Schenectady, right? Because here we are in Schenectady, right? And we have all these lovely images here, and maybe we can just take a look at them with our audience real quick. I took the trouble of bringing them here. So just images like this, right? And if you go to Schenectady today, anywhere in Schenectady, you're not going to see this anymore. Madeline, can you recognize this yet?
Not yet. I'm still a little too new, I think.
Well, that's okay. I mean, this is... So, guys, if you're not familiar, if you're wondering where on earth could the Erie Canal have been in Schenectady, as is often the case, Erie Boulevard. Erie Boulevard is where the Erie Canal was. Right? And we'll talk about how the canal becomes the boulevard. Maybe we'll talk about that in a little bit. But just imagine, so this is Erie Boulevard right as it crosses under or crosses into, this is State Street right here. Like this bridge coming across in the foreground is State Street. So we would be just south of State Street looking towards the north. Like if you guys know where that Wolf's Beer Garden is, like that's the neck of the woods that we're in, looking towards the north, looking towards, again, what is today the center of downtown Schenectady. And you can see it's a pretty well-developed area at this time. You know, it looks like this picture's from 1910. You can see all of the businesses and warehouses and workshops built along the canal because this is the prime real estate. This is where you want to be for any industrial or commercial purposes. Maddie, do you see anything in this image that's interesting to you, or?
Let's see. Well, I do think it's interesting that you know, today, like you said, this is now Erie Boulevard and State Street. You know, in 2025, they're both on the same level, right? Yeah. And there's no like weird, you know, change in elevation, but like back when it was still a canal, it was so much lower. So I guess did they have to like really build up the street in order to make it an actual road intersection? Yeah,
that's a good question, and I don't really know the specifics of how they did that. How did they bring everything to a level grade? I don't really know. You can see in some places, like the Wedgeway building, which is at this intersection. It's not in this picture, but it's at this intersection. You can see right around like ankle level archways for windows, which have been bricked in because those windows were built to face along the canal, which is about 7 feet below what is today the street level. So you can see kind of evidence of that leveling of the streets and of the grade. So I don't really. It looks like they probably brought the canal up rather than bringing. Yeah. I can't imagine bringing State Street down.
That sounds complicated.
Yeah. So that's, I mean, just a kind of a classic canal image here in Schenectady. But we got another classic image right here.
Ooh.
Sure enough.
Okay.
So this is actually pretty much the same location, but just looking south, right? In the last image, we were looking north along Erie Boulevard towards State Street. Here, we're along Erie Boulevard, looking south, looking outside of town. If you were standing here today, what you would see kind of right around here is the big General Electric sign, which is not here in this image, which could probably help us to date this image. I don't have an exact date for this image, but I would say, I don't know, maybe 1870s, 1880s, before General Electric really kind of became General Electric. But you can see we've got these canal boats here, these pretty massive boats that they could move along the canal. And could you imagine having a donkey pull that stuff?
Yeah, that was the other thing that surprised me about like canals in general when I started learning about the Erie Canal is like, again, they're not natural bodies of water. They don't always have like a strong natural current, right? Unless it's like a strong wind.
Well, that's actually one of the advantages. You don't.
Yeah.
I mean, a current can be an advantage in one direction, but in the other direction, it's a real pain in the neck.
Exactly. So having to have this whole system of the towpath and donkeys pulling you up and down the waterways, like that was something that really surprised me. But
do you think our donkeys could pull these boats?
I think they're a little too small, unfortunately.
Yeah, I think they're too spoiled. And to be fair, donkeys and mules kind of get like a lot of credit. Like the mule is in the song, right? I have a mule. Her name is Sal. But horses actually were probably just as common, if not more common. But nevertheless, all this traffic being pulled by pack animals, that was the way to do it. No motorized craft on the Erie Canal.
Yeah. So what would you call these like styles of boats here?
So there were a couple different styles of boats designed for the Erie Canal. I think these technically would fall under the category of line boats. People often think of packet boats when they think of the Erie Canal, but packet boats, as I understand, are more for people traffic than like bulk hauling of goods and supplies. So to me, and I'm not an expert here, but this looks more like a line boat for moving bulk goods. There's like a big hold here, which is full of stuff. I don't know what stuff, but we could speculate. Mm-hmm. So that's another image. And again, just kind of gives you an idea of just how vital this was for the businesses and for the industries of the time. This is an interesting image, and I don't know that I can definitively place where this is just looking at it, but this is kind of like a cool, I mean, I assume this is in the general area here in Schenectady. You can see it looks like we have the Mohawk River on this side and the canal on that side. I don't know. I'm trying to figure it out here.
Yeah, I don't know.
It's an interesting image. Like this looks like the towpath to me. Mm-hmm. But yeah, I don't know so much about this image, but
mm-hmm. But you can kind of start to see like the changing times, right? Whereas the canal used to be kind of the main source of transportation in this area, but now we're having modern conveniences like cars. Like
yeah, so that's you could probably by the time that this image was taken, the canal was probably not really in use at this point in time. The canal was probably pretty much supplanted by the railroad by the turn of the 20th century. So you can tell there's no traffic on the water right now. So maybe that's kind of a sign of the times for this image here. That's an interesting one. I'll have to do more research to figure out where specifically this might be.
I'll have to ask our archivist.
I bet Marietta, she knows everything. Marietta, she would have been here, but she's taking care of her dog today. He's got a vet appointment. She could just tell us. All right. So this is State Street. You can't see the canal, but this is the bridge, right? So we just looked at those last two images the first image had this bridge in it, and now we're standing on the bridge, kind of looking up State Street towards where Proctor's is now, right? So that's kind of what's going on here. And again, another automobile. So these images were taken towards the end of the lifespan of the canal. Mm-hmm. Well, I mean, we could keep on going through these images, but there's some other things that we want to talk about too.
Yeah,
right?
So we kind of, saw that, the canal, it's not just about the engineering and the locks and the mules and the horses, right? It's also about people, right? People lived their entire lives either maybe along the canal, working on the canal, or just being directly kind of influenced by its presence, right? Mm-hmm. So what are some kind of interesting characters, interesting stories that, connect to the canal and its influence?
Yeah. It's funny that you mentioned that these people who lived their lives along the canal, because I was talking to Marietta about this podcast yesterday, and she was sharing some of the stuff that she would like to talk about if she could have been here. She mentions how she was going through some census records, and you have certain people listed in the census in Schenectady, and their address is just canal. Which is to say that these people literally, they lived their lives on the Erie Canal, and when the census taker kind of came through, they just happened to be in Schenectady at the time. So they just gave their address as the Erie Canal because that's where they lived their lives. They would, they were probably, living and sleeping on their boats, traveling, back and forth through the whole canal season, and that's just where they lived their lives, and kids would grow up into this life. If your mom and dad were involved in the canal, then you were growing up and you're probably leading those pack animals along the way. So it was like a whole culture or subculture unto itself of these Erie Canal boat folks. Yeah. I don't know if you would call them sailors per se, you don't really sail the canal, right?
I didn't see any sails on those boats.
Yeah, I mean, definitely not any wind power involved. But these were, if they're not technically sailors, they're still pretty salty, right? So imagine all the stereotypes you might imagine of some port dwelling sailor. You can also apply those to a certain extent to the canal folks. They were pretty rough and tumble people. They had certainly certain appetites. You work up a powerful thirst, hauling this cargo 50 plus miles a day along the old Erie Canal. And Schenectady really got the brunt of that because it's not at the end of the journey, but it's getting pretty close to the end of the journey, right? Like if you start over in Buffalo and you've traveled all this way across the state of New York and you're getting to Schenectady, you're not done yet, but you're getting pretty close. So Schenectady was very popular as a, the saloons and the bars in Schenectady. The canal men would definitely hit those up on the way, quite literally along the way. We have anecdotes where, imagine a canal boat is rolling through town. It's coming through the south side of town. Again, imagine Erie Boulevard. You're driving up Erie Boulevard, traveling along the Erie Canal, and you're getting close to that intersection we just showed you with State Street. And there's saloons and taverns all along there. So canalmen would jump off of the boat. It's still moving, right? The boat is still in progress. They would jump off the boat, and that boat is traveling, 2-3 miles an hour. That's like a brisk walking pace. So they have to be even brisker. So they're going to run. They're going to sprint to the nearest saloon, pound a few shots, maybe, pick up something to go, just spend all the money that they're earning on this journey, maybe, purchase alcohol. And then as the boat is still traveling, they're going to run back, catch up to the boat by one of the bridges, like by Liberty Street or Union Street, and jump back onto the boat. The boat never even stops and never even misses a beat, but they've, loaded up on all the stuff, all the provisions that they might need there at the saloons.
Honestly, that's kind of impressive.
It kind of is, right?
They could probably give some like Olympic athletes a run for their money with those speeds.
Or maybe just like Olympic drinking, maybe it could be a sport into its own right.
Yeah, 2026 maybe.
Yeah, right. We'll get it there. But also, with that also comes, a little bit of disturbances, you might say, because sometimes either people imbibe too much, or maybe there'd just be a lot of animosity generated along a long canal voyage. Let's say, back around Utica, you got into a scuffle with another boat, right? The captain of another boat. Let's say he budged you in line for the lock, allegedly, whatever, right? Mm-hmm. So you got to settle this dispute somewhere. And usually people would wait till, the end of the journey. But again, because Schenectady is pretty close to the end of the journey, sometimes people would just, let fisticuffs break out right here in Schenectady along the canal. They would settle these disputes the old-fashioned way. I don't know if that's a good thing or what, but that's what would happen. Mm-hmm. Even kids would get involved, right? You'd have like these canal boats operating out of Schenectady, and they'd have these little like young promoters, like these little kids who would go around advertising the boats. And even the kids would get in scuffles about like, oh, this is my territory, this is our turf, this belongs to this boat, and the captain's going to give me this amount of money. So you'd even have little kids duking it out over the competition that the Erie Canal created, this kind of rancorous state that these people might be in sometimes because, of their livelihoods depending on it, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So it could be pretty wild.
Wow. So not always sunshine and roses when it comes to the canal.
It's easy to have like these rose-tinted, nostalgic glasses about the Erie Canal and
Life on the water.
Yeah, right. Mm-hmm. I mean, there certainly might be some romantic aspects to it, but it wasn't all fun and games. It wasn't all like that.
Especially once you add in all the liquor in town.
Oh, absolutely, yeah. And also some of the dangers kind of inherent in the canal. Like we have a lot of horror stories related to the canal from around here. Like for instance, in 1824. Now this didn't happen in Schenectady or on the Erie Canal. It actually happened on the Champlain Canal. And I know it's not the Champlain Canal podcast, but I had to bring it up because it's a pretty gruesome story, folks. You might want to avert your ears. But this was in 1824, and these canals were still new, right? They still hadn't even like fully opened up yet, but they, certain sections of them were in use. And up by Stillwater, right north of Albany, there was a woman named Jane Livingston who was taking a ride on one of these newfangled canal boats, and she was sleeping, dozing away on the top deck of this boat. And you know how, in the song, the refrain is, low bridge, everybody down, low bridge, because we're coming to a town. Now, folks, you got to take that literally when you're on a canal boat, because Jane Livingston, Miss Livingston, she was dozing away on the top deck there, and the boat was passing under a bridge. And unfortunately for Jane, like her head was resting on top of this barrel, and the barrel was at such a height that there was not enough clearance between that barrel and that bridge for her head. And folks, you can probably imagine where this is going. Her head was crushed by the bridge. And she did not survive that process, folks. So the poor woman, by the time anyone realized what was going on, before they realized the danger, and she was blissfully unaware perhaps, and her life ended that way on the Champlain Canal. So folks, you got to take that seriously. Low bridge, everybody get down.
The story like that, maybe we should have saved this episode for October or something.
Oh,
My
yeah. Well,
goodness.
we got other gruesome, horrible stuff to tell you in October. And another one, so in 1885, just outside of Schenectady, right around the town of Pattersonville, there's a lock in the town of Pattersonville. And again, these locks are like these water elevators. So you imagine these big boats, and they weigh multiple tons. I don't know how much they weigh, but we're talking several thousands of pounds that these boats weigh. And the locks have these high stone walls. And somehow there's this guy named Patrick or Paddy Ryan, an Irish immigrant who was working along the canal. And, something happened where he slipped and he fell off of his boat as the boat was kind of, docking up against the stone wall of this lock. And unfortunately, he was crushed. He was crushed between this boat, this massive boat, and the unyielding stone wall of the lock. And so they were able to, push the boat away from him. It's not like he was pulverized to dust, but, his body was very severely damaged, crushed by this experience. And obviously, there was no doctors available to treat him out by Pattersonville. It was a very small rural town in those days, so they had to rush him back to medical treatment somewhere. Now, the closest place to get a doctor would be Schenectady. So imagine they got to put him back on the boat and rush him back into town. Now, when I say rush him, I mean you can only travel at a maximum of 5 miles an hour on the canal, because that's how fast the boat can be towed by a horse or a mule, right? They can only go 5 miles an hour. So could you imagine, just plodding along at 5 miles an hour? You got to get this guy to a doctor, and you're going at a slow jogging pace back into town. And we're talking several miles. 10, 15 miles. Mm-hmm. So it must have been a 2, 3, 4 hour journey via the canal to get to Schenectady. And when Schenectady, they had doctors in Schenectady, but they didn't have a hospital. Mm-hmm. This would actually be one of the inciting incidents to build what would become Ellis Hospital in Schenectady because of the poor fate of, Paddy Ryan here. So there was no hospital to take him to. So they called the doctor, and the doctor went to see him. They just kind of dumped this poor guy in a furniture warehouse along the Erie Canal, which also conveniently doubled as an undertaker's office. So there were coffins stacked against the wall as well. So this poor guy, crushed, broken, bleeding, described as ashen from the blood loss, right? All the blood had drained from his body. And he's sitting in this dusty furniture warehouse just waiting for the doctor to see him. And the doctor sees him, and there's really not much that could be done. I don't know, if even if the best medical treatment had been available right away, if they could have saved this guy. But he expired there on that day, crushed in the line of duty along the Erie Canal. So again, your safety was not guaranteed along this lovely little stretch of canal.
Not all sunshine and roses.
Not at all.
Different time. All right, let's bring the energy up a little bit. Any more fun, quirky stories related to canal?
I do have one fun story where I don't think anyone was killed, but someone could have been. So everyone knows Charles Steinmetz, right? Mm-hmm. Beloved Schenectady figure, the kind of this electrical engineering genius of the early 20th century. Well, he was kind of a quirky guy. And he lived for a time along the Erie Canal at a place, if you guys know where that Burger King along Erie Boulevard is. So there was a building there long before the Burger King. That Burger King is not 100 years old.
I had no idea.
It's not the first Burger King ever. And so Steinmetz, as he did throughout his life, liked to keep a variety of exotic pets. Later in his life, he would have crows as pets. He would have Gila monsters as pets. Whatever that is. If anyone knows what a Gila monster is, please let us know in the comments. But he had one. He had 2, actually. And apparently, when he was living alongside the Erie Canal, he kept alligators somewhere in his house. And I don't know if these are full-size alligators or the little caiman-looking guys. You probably know more about alligators than I, as a native Floridian, right?
Yeah, canals and gators. This is really starting to sound a bit like Florida.
Okay, yeah,
I'm feeling more at home.
Okay, yeah. Well, so yeah, you're right on the money here. The gators escaped.
Oh, of course
somehow, some way they escaped, and of course they went straight into the canal because that's where an alligator would want to be. And they were swimming around in the Erie Canal, and I could imagine that most of the people in Schenectady had never seen an alligator in their life. No. But here they are, they're seeing these reptilian monstrosities swimming back and forth along the canal. Now, by that time, the canal hadn't been it wasn't really used for traffic a whole lot. So I don't think, these packet boatmen had to dodge the alligators. But it must have been a remarkable sight to be seen. And I don't know how they got the alligators out, but eventually they did. Who's going to go into the canal to wrestle these alligators?
The poor person who had to
right?
do that. I hope he got an extra drink from the bar that night or something as a thank
double
you.
rations on that one.
100%.
So yes, the alligators were fine. Charles Steinmetz was fine. Everyone was fine. But I mean, that could have been a dangerous situation if someone had.
Yeah.
Not that I think that anyone would ever go swimming in the Erie Canal, because that's one thing that people don't really talk about so much. Like the Erie Canal, again, we have all these photos. Look at this photo of the Erie Canal. Doesn't that look cute and quaint?
That's so lovely. The bridge and the horses and people just living their lives. It's so beautiful.
But as historians, we know better. We know that one thing that doesn't come through in this image is the smell.
Oh,
right.
gosh.
Now we do have let me just see if I can find. Perfect.
Okay, right there.
It's almost like I planned it that way. Let's take a look. Our final image of the Erie Canal here. So, again, this is not a color photograph, but if this was a color photograph, I'm sure this would be a lovely shade of green or some other weird color. It's not necessarily the cleanest water. And people in Schenectady, they would treat the Erie Canal as kind of like an open sewer, kind of just a public use sewer, anything and everything that would be dumped from houses. And this is before municipal trash pickup as well. So ashes from your fireplace, kitchen scraps, dead animals.
Dead alligators?
Hopefully not dead alligators. Hopefully not. But yeah, they would just dump anything and everything into the canal. And the canal is usually 7 feet deep, so you don't necessarily notice it until, the canal is only maintained up through usually October is when they let the waters recede, right? They don't maintain the water level. So then the water level kind of drops back down to a trickle, and everything that had been dumped there over the last several months comes up to the surface, and the smell and the sight and the biological hazard this thing must have been, it was not a good situation.
No, I can imagine why it kind of eventually fell out of favor because of all of that. I couldn't deal with it. I would have moved away.
I know, and so all this property alongside the canal, which used to have great industrial value, right? Because the canal was how you move things into and out of the city. Well, by the early 20th century, the canal was obsolete from that purpose, and now it was just kind of an eyesore. It was just a public health and safety hazard. So something had to be done. And in 1925, that's exactly what they did. They actually, they paved over the Erie Canal in Schenectady. They turned it into the Erie Boulevard that we're so familiar with here today. And that really does kind of, bring an end to at least, the historic canal here in Schenectady. Clinton's Ditch, kind of done away with, obliterated, hidden from view.
Kind of overtaken by the railroads, and then eventually railroads get overtaken by automobiles and highways, and the cycle of progress continues, I suppose.
Maybe if you want to call it progress, it's some kind of progress,
The cycle of change.
Change, I guess, is a great word for it. Change is the only constant.
Yeah, but there's still evidence today of the Erie Canal, right? It didn't completely disappear into the ether. So if people are still interested in getting to see some of that history up close, what's some stuff they can check out?
Well, yeah, so there's always ways to check out the history of the canal. The canal had such a profound impact on our city and on our area that there's still vestiges, there's still remnants of the canal. If you're walking along the bike path, for instance, the towpath for the Erie Canal has been turned into a pedestrian and a bicycle path, which stretches across the whole state of New York. So you can retrace the steps of those packet boat men and women as they were traveling along the Erie Canal. You can do the same thing on a nice, modern, paved surface and travel the whole 360 plus miles between Albany and Buffalo. And you can do the section here in Schenectady if you would like to. If you'd like to learn more about Schenectady's history and its canal history in particular, we actually will be doing a Erie Canal walking tour. We do a lot of walking tours in the spring and in the summer, and we have a Erie Canal themed one coming up. So there's a shameless plug for that, folks. Check out our website for more information about that. And of course, there's something very special coming up this year in particular, because it is the 200th anniversary of the canal, and it's also the 200th anniversary of a visit by one famous Frenchman, the Marquis de Lafayette. Like, one of the first people to come to Schenectady on the Erie Canal was none other than the Marquis de Lafayette, who was taking a grand tour of the new United States, this country which he helped fight to create and to preserve in the American Revolution. So when he came to Schenectady along the Erie Canal to a hero's welcome, it was truly the event of the season. And we're going to have, there's going to be an event. We're involved in it, but we can't take full credit for this. There's a committee that's putting on a celebration of Lafayette's visit to Schenectady along the canal. That's going to be on June 11th, 2025. So definitely look that up, folks. We have information about that at our sites. We've got brochures and advertisements for that. But that seems to be a really exciting event on June 11th of this year, 2025. There's going to be a whole recreation of that famous reunion of Lafayette and Schenectady. So I'm really looking forward to that.
Yeah, I am too. That sounds great.
Wait, aren't you taking that day off?
We weren't supposed to tell the audience about that.
Yeah.
Oh my gosh.
Sorry, that's one of the many things we're keeping secret from our audience. We're full of duplicity here.
Sorry, guys.
On the Here at Schenectady podcast.
Oh my gosh. Well, on that note. But no, and I think I learned a lot today.
I learned a lot today too.
I feel like a true New Yorker now that I know about the whole history of the Erie Canal. I have some songs I have to go find on Spotify after this. I wanted to thank Mike for kind of sharing all this great information and the photos.
Maddie, I want to thank you for hosting this. This is your first hosting gig. I think you did a great job.
Oh my gosh, I might have a future in this.
You might you might be stuck with it. You might might not have a way out, I guess, is the way I try to think about it.
Well, it sounds like you'll be hearing from me again soon.
Yeah, right. And of course, big thanks to Open Stage Media for helping us put this podcast together, making it really nice and professional. This really beats the $50 PewDiePie mic that I've got at home. So again, thanks for helping us out with the technical support.
Actually, community support is kind of the only reason why we're able to do what we do. So we always appreciate it. Here.
And with that, I think we will say goodbye or until next time, because we'll be doing more of these podcasts. We love doing them, and we hope you love watching them. If you do, just feel free to let us know. The more interaction we get with these podcasts, the more we can do them. So we appreciate any comments, any questions, and maybe that can feature into a future podcast.
Yeah, if there's anything you want to learn more about, let us know.
All right. With that, we'll see you later, guys.
Thank you.